The date was May 8, 1972. Inside the belly of the Sabena Flight 571, the air hung thick, a suffocating blanket woven of fear and stale recycled oxygen. 100 souls, a tapestry of nationalities, ages, and backgrounds, were trapped in the metal cocoon, their faces etched with a grim acceptance of their second day of captivity. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a maddening counterpoint to the thudding in their chests. Outside, the Israeli sun beat down relentlessly on the tarmac of Lod Airport, baking the fuselage until it radiated a heat that seemed to seep into their very bones. 4 figures, shadows against the relentless light, patrolled the aisles. Their faces, hidden behind the veils of desperation and fanaticism, were hardened by weeks of training and fueled by a cause the hostages could barely fathom. Pistols, cold and metallic, rested heavy in their hands, the barrels glinting menacingly in the confined space. Each step was a threat, each glance a potential trigger. Their demands, relayed through the panicked voice of the pilot, Captain Reginald Levy, echoed through the plane's cramped interior, each repetition ratcheting up the tension, the desperation. They wanted the release of Palestinian prisoners, a trade for the lives they held in their hands. Outside, a different kind of tension simmered. A perimeter of military vehicles, their silhouettes sharp against the horizon, formed a silent barrier. Powerful spotlights speared the darkness, cutting through the shadows and illuminating the scene like a theatrical stage. Behind them, the Israeli negotiators, seasoned veterans of a different kind of war, played a dangerous game of cat and mouse, buying time, each carefully chosen word, a thread in a tapestry of deception. Their voices, calm and reassuring, crackled over the radio, a stark contrast to the urgency of the hijackers. But their purpose was not merely to stall. A plan was taking shape, a plan as audacious as it was dangerous, a plan that would reshape the world of hostage rescue operations. Inside the aircraft, thoughts swirled in a chaotic vortex. The hostages, stripped of control, forced to confront their mortality. They were reduced to the most fundamental of instincts: survival. Every rustle of clothing, every cough, every nervous shuffle of feet amplified the silence, creating a soundscape of dread. The metallic tang of fear hung in the air, a taste that clung to the back of the throat. Some among the passengers, former soldiers, veterans of other conflicts, assessed the situation, their minds calculating odds, weighing the slim possibility of resistance against the certainty of immediate reprisal. They knew the futility of such a gesture. The space was too confined, the threat of explosives too immediate. The hijackers couldn't know it, but 16 figures cloaked in white coveralls and armed with more than just courage were moving towards them. These men were the tip of Israel's spear, Sayeret Matkal, the elite special forces unit. They were the masters of deception, the architects of unlikely victories. They would become the mechanics, responding to the fabricated technical fault. In minutes they would be inside, executing a rescue so precise, so swift, that most of the hostages would walk away alive, while the hijackers would be neutralized before they could pull a trigger. The fate of the 571 hung in the balance, a delicate equation of risk, skill, and the cold calculation of war. The 4 figures, silhouetted against the pre-dawn glow of the Brussels sky, moved with a practiced fluidity. They were shadows, blending into the anonymity of the boarding crowd. Alitara, a man carved from stone, his eyes darting, took the lead, his internal clock ticking with the precision of the explosives they'd packed. Behind him, Halsa, his frame broader, a silent mountain of coiled tension, mirrored Alitara's intensity. The women, Rimatenes, and the woman whose identity would forever remain a whisper, followed their male counterparts, their movements a stark contrast, fluid, graceful, yet betraying the same cold purpose that burned in their eyes. They had spent weeks preparing, poring over blueprints of the Boeing 707, dissecting its vulnerabilities, rehearsing every step of their deadly ballet. They knew the positions of the emergency exits, the blind spots of the security cameras, the nuances of the cabin crew's routine. Every detail, from the exact timing of their movements to the placement of their weapons, had been meticulously planned, each variable accounted for. They were not merely terrorists. They were architects of chaos, constructing a scenario of fear and control. 30 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft reached cruising altitude over the serene Austrian landscape. It was the signal. Alitara and Halsa, their eyes locked in a silent acknowledgement, moved towards the cockpit, their hands instinctively reaching beneath their jackets. The two women, Rimatanis and her companion, rose as one, shedding their veneer of normalcy. Their faces, moments before etched with the fatigue of a long flight, hardened into masks of resolve. Rimatanis, her voice a low, commanding rasp, stalked down the aisle, her gaze sweeping over the unsuspecting passengers. Fear, a palpable entity, began to coalesce in the confined space, a cold premonition that prickled the skin. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere turned toxic. Alitara, his features contorted in a sneer, shoved the startled first officer into his seat, the cold steel of his weapon a brutal punctuation to his words. Halsa barked orders, his voice a guttural command. The captain, Levy, his face a mask of professional control, obeyed, understanding the weight of the lives entrusted to his care. Rimatanis and her cohort, moving with terrifying efficiency, began to secure the cabin. Each motion was deliberate, the air thick with the metallic tang of impending violence. They found their concealed weapons, carefully disassembled and smuggled aboard in individual components. With practiced hands, they reassembled them. The click of the weapons locking into place reverberated through the cabin, a harbinger of the terror to come. The passengers, a motley collection of humanity, were frozen in a shared moment of disbelief. A businessman still clutching his briefcase, a young couple returning from vacation, children and Israelis, all stared at the figures, the reality of their plight slowly dawning. They were hostages now, their lives reduced to a bargaining chip, their fate hanging precariously on the whims of a group whose hearts were as cold as the barrel of a gun. The dream of a smooth flight to Tel Aviv was shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of a hijacked plane and the looming shadow of death. Outside the grounded Sabina flight, behind the glare of floodlights and the bristling perimeter of military vehicles, the weight of the world pressed down on the Israeli commanders assembled at Lod Airport. News of the hijacking, a brazen act of terrorism, had ricocheted around the globe, and now the fate of 100 souls rested on their shoulders. Within the makeshift command post, the air crackled with a tension that was both palpable and suffocating, thick with the scent of stale coffee and fear. Prime Minister Golda Meir, her face etched with the weariness of 1,000 decisions, presided over the emergency cabinet meeting, the hushed voices of the assembled dignitaries barely registering over the clamor of a nation holding its breath. The silence was more profound than any noise, punctuated only by the staccato of military briefings and the occasional urgent phone call, each a grim update in this rapidly unfolding drama. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, his eye patch a stark emblem of past conflicts, leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "We have to be clear," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "We will not negotiate. We will not give in to their demands." The policy was clear, the stance unyielding. No concessions to terrorists. It was a principle, a moral imperative. And yet, 100 lives. The meeting adjourned, leaving behind a residue of anxiety and the stark reality of the challenge ahead. The decision had been made, the die cast. Now the execution fell to the military. General David Elazar, the chief of staff, a man known for his unflinching resolve, took charge, his sharp eyes scanning maps, his mind calculating probabilities. He turned to the assembled officers, his voice carrying the weight of command. "We need a plan, a viable plan, and we need it now." The responsibility for crafting that plan fell to Sayeret Matkal, Israel's elite special forces unit. Its commander, Lieutenant Colonel Ehud Barak, a man already a legend in the IDF, stood out of the gathering. His expression was impassive, his features chiseled and sharp. His mind was already at work, sifting through the limited options, weighing the risks, calculating the odds. The air hung with the metallic tang of impending violence, a prelude to the storm that would soon break over the hijacked plane. Barak, a master of unconventional warfare, understood that a direct assault was a death sentence. The hijackers, armed and desperate, would respond with deadly force. Their primary goal would be to eliminate the hostages and themselves. He needed an approach that was both audacious and precise, a surgical strike that could neutralize the terrorists while minimizing casualties. The clock was ticking. Every second that passed brought the hijackers closer to breaking point. Every second increased the risk of tragedy. The world watched, waiting for Israel to make its move, but time was not on their side. The pressure was mounting as the fate of the hostages hung in the balance. The Israelis had a fight to win. The desert sun beat down on the tarmac, shimmering off the fuselage of the hijacked Sabena flight. Inside the makeshift command center, a small room buzzing with nervous energy, David Kimchi, the Mossad's lead negotiator, stared at the grainy monitor showing the aircraft. He hadn't slept in 36 hours, and the stubble on his face was a testament to the marathon of phone calls and coded messages. His primary objective: to keep the hijackers talking, to keep them distracted, to buy time. Kimchi knew that every word, every delay, every promise offered a sliver of opportunity for the men and women planning the rescue. He was a master of the double game, weaving threads of plausible lies and carefully constructed half-truths. His voice, a carefully modulated baritone, had become a soothing balm to the increasingly frayed nerves of the Black September militants. He'd learned their cadence, the brittle impatience beneath the veneer of defiance. "They want the release of those prisoners, eh?" Kimchi murmured into the microphone, his words echoing across the frequency. He could almost smell the sweat and stale air of the cockpit on the other end. Imagine the tense faces, the ever-present threat of violence. "We want our comrades freed," came the clipped response of Alitara, the apparent leader of the hijackers. His voice was gravelly, a smoker's rasp that betrayed a nervousness he tried hard to conceal. "Of course," Kimchi replied, his tone smooth, almost sorrowful. "We understand the sentiments, but the wheels of bureaucracy, you understand, they turn slowly. We need clarification." He let a beat of silence hang, a calculated pause designed to unsettle. The pressure cooker was on. It was all about maintaining control. "Clarification? What do you not understand? We want them released, that's all." Alitara's voice rose a notch. He was losing control. "Perfect." Kimchi pressed his advantage. "The charges, they are very specific. Terrorism, yes, but also smuggling. Some, I believe, are implicated in more serious offenses. We need to be absolutely certain we are releasing the correct individuals." He was stalling, of course. The clarification was just a ploy, a chance to keep the conversation going, to feed them information about the logistics of freedom. He let his words dangle, a line he knew would pull the hook. He could almost see Alitara clenching his jaw, the veins in his forehead pulsing with each angry heartbeat. He pictured Alitara pacing in the narrow cockpit. He knew from previous exchanges that Alitara would be speaking to the others on the comms. Kimchi focused on his own breathing, inhaling deeply to calm himself. The silence, punctuated only by the crackle of the radio, grew thicker with each passing second. He could picture the other hijackers, the two women, Remont and the other, whose name he still hadn't confirmed, in the cabin. The hostages, huddled and terrified. Kimchi felt a cold dread as he considered what would happen if they didn't get their plan to work. "We have provided the list." Alitara's voice was strained, a hint of desperation creeping in. "Every name, every detail. We gave you the instructions." "Yes, yes," Kimchi soothed, careful not to sound condescending. "And we are following. But the legal process, it is complex. These things take time." Kimchi knew the hijackers' patience was dwindling. Each minute he could hold them on the line, he was increasing the chance of success, of ending this nightmare. He imagined the commandos preparing, inching closer. Kimchi's gaze shifted to the wall-mounted clock. Time, always the enemy, was suddenly his ally. He had to keep them on the line, keep them believing, keep them waiting. He let out a long, slow sigh, the sound designed to convey the immense weight of the situation. He had to make it believable. He had to play the part of a fool. He had to keep the faith. "We are working on it," he finally said. "We are working on it." The engineers began their work, their faces grim, fingers already coated in grime. Air conditioning, they announced, but also, crucially, the aircraft's pressurization systems. Without them, the cabin would become a furnace. Their words, delivered with a rehearsed urgency, seemed to take root, each syllable a calculated seed planted in the minds of the hijackers. Barak knew that the key to success rested not just on speed and violence, but on the manipulation of the hijackers' own anxieties. After nearly 2 days cooped up with mounting tensions and mounting frustration, the hijackers would be desperate for a solution. With the right story, they had to, let the mechanics in. The scenario demanded meticulous fabrication, a tapestry woven from technical jargon and a convincing sense of crisis. The details, crafted by experts in aircraft maintenance, were designed to sound complex, but not immediately threatening. A faulty seal, an overheating pump, a potential for catastrophic failure if left unaddressed. Each detail carefully calculated to sound serious enough to warrant immediate attention, but not so serious as to make the hijackers suspicious. They needed to believe they were helping prevent a disaster, not walking into a trap. Their cover story meticulously prepared, the team needed to convince the hijackers they were in no way a threat. They had to act like men absorbed in a technical problem. This meant familiarizing themselves with the layout of the 707, with the locations of critical systems and the likely points of entry. They had to understand the maintenance protocols, the language, the tools. The training was intensive. Months spent in simulations where every angle, every shadow, every potential misstep was scrutinized and corrected. They practiced the gait of maintenance men, the way they leaned in to inspect equipment, the way they casually discussed technical issues. They learned to speak the language of the aircraft, the jargon, the abbreviations, the phrases that would instantly reassure any legitimate crew member. Their rehearsals took place in meticulously reconstructed sections of a 707, where they honed every aspect of their performance, from the way they held a wrench to the way they exchanged glances. Specialist teams were assembled, experts in ballistics, in explosive device, in psychological warfare. Their expertise as crucial as the commandos' skill in close-quarters combat. The Mossad psychologists studied the hijackers' profiles, their vulnerabilities, their potential breaking points. Their analysis provided insights into their likely reactions, their fears, and their levels of paranoia. The team devised a plan based on this knowledge, exploiting the hijackers' fatigue and paranoia. The tools themselves became part of the deception. The commandos practiced assembling and disassembling their weapons with lightning speed, hiding them inside the toolboxes. Every tool, every bolt, every wire had to be in its place, giving no indication of the presence of a weapon. The cases, borrowed from actual maintenance crews, were filled with the tools of the trade: wrenches, screwdrivers, multimeters, and the small-caliber pistols that were meant to dispatch the hijackers. Each commando had to become an expert at switching roles, and the speed with which they could transform, from a mechanic to an assassin, would determine the success of the mission. The pressure grew with each passing day. The team was ready, the plan complete, but the outcome was still uncertain. The air in the hangar tasted of jet fuel and sweat. Outside, the May night pressed against the metal walls, but inside, a different kind of pressure built. Tension, anticipation, a tautness that stretched the skin, prickled the nerves. 16 men, soon to be mechanics, soon to be something else entirely, moved in a practiced dance, each a vital cog in a machine of deception and lethal precision. Lieutenant Colonel Ehud Barak, his face a mask of controlled intensity, surveyed his team. The best Israel had to offer. Each man hand-picked for his cold-blooded efficiency, his ability to function under the crucible of absolute pressure. Among them, a young officer, Captain Benjamin Netanyahu, his eyes alight with a fire that burned just beneath the surface, a quiet determination that spoke of ambition and a steel will. "Remember," Barak's voice, low and steady, cut through the quiet hum of activity. "We are not soldiers now. We are mechanics. We are there to fix a problem, not cause one. The success of this operation hinges on our ability to deceive. Every gesture, every word, every movement must be authentic. They must believe we are here to help, not to kill." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. The air grew thicker, heavy with the unspoken understanding of the risks. Lives hung in the balance. Every step was a gamble. The commandos ran through the final checklist, their movements precise and economical. They donned the white coveralls, identical to those worn by Sabina maintenance crews. The canvas of their pockets felt empty, save for the tools they carried. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a gleaming, harmless array that was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. But beneath the innocuous disguise, nestled in toolboxes, lay the instruments of their true purpose. The compact, silenced pistols, loaded with specialized ammunition, designed to incapacitate, not devastate. Each weapon represented a life, a choice made in the crucible of training, a decision to inflict deadly force with absolute efficiency. The commandos went through the final stages of the drill. They rehearsed their entries, their stances, their movements like actors memorizing their lines. They practiced the speed of the draw, the acquisition of targets, the split-second decision to fire. The repetitions became a mantra, etched into muscle memory, designed to override the emotional responses of fear and hesitation. Netanyahu, leading the team that would enter the passenger cabin, reviewed his assignment. He would move through the plane, locate the two female hijackers and eliminate them with swiftness and precision. The knowledge of what was at stake, the weight of responsibility, filled him. His stomach churned with a mixture of dread and a fierce, almost predatory focus. Outside the hangar, the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red, a cruel irony of beauty as they prepared to step into the darkness. The hours of planning, the months of training, the weight of the world, all distilled into this single, crucial moment. Barak's gaze met each of his men in turn. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding of what lay ahead. The time for rehearsals was over. It was time for action. Time to become mechanics. Time to become killers. Time to become the thin line between life and death. The fluorescent lights of the Boeing 707 hummed, a constant irritating thrum that had become Rima Tanis's enemy. It was the sound of the plane, a metallic drone that echoed the pounding in her skull, the relentless ache behind her eyes. 30 hours. 30 hours of stale air, recycled breaths, and the mounting weight of the impossible. The hostages, once a source of terror, were now just a background hum, their faces blurred by fatigue and fear, their movements reduced to a slow, almost mechanical routine. Rima, whose name she'd almost forgotten, felt a strange detachment, a disconnection from the mission, from the cause. The fire that had fueled her initial zeal, the righteous anger that had burned so brightly during training, had been reduced to a smoldering ember. Her partner, the one with the perpetually grim face of Alitara, kept barking orders, issuing threats. But even his voice seemed distant, muffled by the relentless pressure. She shifted, the familiar weight of the Makarov pistol under her arm a cold comfort. The cabin was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the scent of fear, stale coffee, and the faint, underlying smell of fuel. Every creak of the plane, every cough or rustle from the hostages, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She felt exposed, vulnerable. The constant vigilance a torturous exercise in controlled anxiety. Sleep was a luxury, stolen in short, fragmented bursts. Dreams, when they came, were vivid and terrifying. The faces of those she was supposed to free, dissolving into the blank stare of the hostages. The cold steel of the gun pressed against her palm, a constant reminder of the decision she would have to make. Her focus was blurring. The initial certainty, the unwavering belief in the righteousness of their cause, was wavering. The faces of the hostages, a collage of fear and exhaustion, gnawed at her resolve. She was acutely aware of their eyes, following her, judging her, silently condemning her for their predicament. The constant tension was taking its toll. The negotiator, with his smooth voice and endless demands for clarification, chipped away at her resolve. His words, delivered with a deceptive calm, were a slow poison, sowing seeds of doubt in her weary mind. Was this the right thing? Was there another way? The questions, once unthinkable, now clawed at the edges of her consciousness. She ran a hand through her hair, the rough strands a welcome sensation against her sweating forehead. Her uniform, once a symbol of authority, felt heavy, constricting. She was exhausted, and her mind was wandering, her focus faltering. She glanced at the faces of the hostages. What were they thinking? Did they see her as a monster? Did they understand why she was doing this? The constant hum of the plane, the metallic tang of fear, the weight of the gun under her arm. It all felt unbearable. The mission, once a clear path, now felt like a labyrinth, and Rima felt lost. The weight of responsibility, the crushing burden of the lives entrusted to her, threatened to overwhelm her. The fire had burned down to embers, leaving only the chilling awareness that she was losing control. The world outside, the world of the mission, was fading. The only reality was the suffocating confines of the plane and the horrifying truth that she was trapped within it, just as much as the hostages. The late evening air hung thick and heavy over Lod, the scent of jet fuel mixing with the cloying sweetness of bougainvillea. Inside the belly of the waiting Boeing, sweat slicked the commandos' faces despite the artificial chill of the air conditioning. Tension was a tangible thing, a weight pressing down on their chests as they waited for the signal. Outside, under the glare of floodlights, the mechanic's truck, a Sabina vehicle identical to those used for routine maintenance, crunched to a halt. Captain Benjamin Netanyahu, his jaw set, felt the tremor of the engine as it died, a sudden silence replacing the low thrum. He could almost taste the metallic tang of adrenaline. Beside him, the other commandos, faces grim but eyes steady, adjusted their grip on their toolboxes. The illusion was about to be put to the test. They moved with practiced ease, the casual gait of men accustomed to this drill. The doors hissed open, and the air rushed in, carrying the scent of dust and fear. Netanyahu led the way, his heart hammering against his ribs. They walked towards the aircraft, the floodlights turning the white overalls into beacons in the darkness. Ali Taha, one of the hijackers, stood in the open doorway, his face etched with suspicion. He scanned them, his eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of deception. Netanyahu met his gaze, forcing a relaxed smile, the practiced ease of a man simply doing his job. "Morning, sir," Netanyahu said in heavily accented English, the voice of the young mechanics. "We understand there's a problem with the air conditioning. Need to take a look." Taha's eyes flicked to their toolboxes. The search was perfunctory, a quick pat down, a cursory glance inside the cases. He didn't open them. He was looking for guns. He couldn't know that the real weapons were hidden beneath wrenches and screwdrivers. Netanyahu submitted to the search. He felt the man's hands rough and calloused patting down his shoulders, his arms. He held his breath. He knew with absolute certainty that one false move, one flicker of unease would be enough. The mission, the lives of everyone on board, rested on this charade. He allowed the man to feel the solidity of the metal toolbox, its contents hidden beneath the guise of ordinary tools. He allowed the man to see only what he expected to see. The search complete, Taha waved them aboard. "Go, but don't take too long." They entered the plane, each man moving to a predetermined position. Netanyahu, with two of his men, moved down the aisle towards the passenger cabin. They walked slowly, their feet echoing on the metal floor. The stale air inside the aircraft was thick with the scent of fear and something else, a lingering scent of the past. The passengers watched them, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and dread. They knew intuitively that something was about to happen. Netanyahu paused ostensibly to check an overhead panel. He could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken question in their eyes. He gave them a small, reassuring smile, a practiced gesture meant to convey calm. But his hand was already resting on the handle of his toolbox. He caught the eye of one of his men. The air crackled with a silent, shared understanding. In the cabin, the two women who were the hijackers were watching them, also wary. The commandos were in position. The trap was set. The moment of truth was imminent. The only thing left was to wait. The metallic scent of jet fuel, mixed with the stale, recirculated air of the cabin, hung heavy as the mechanics moved through the 707. The cloying sweetness of fear was another aroma, a phantom that clung to the upholstery, to the very fabric of the hostages' clothing. Benjamin Netanyahu, his jaw tight, felt the tremor of suppressed adrenaline thrumming through his chest, a counterpoint to the careful calm he projected. He passed a hand over his face, as if wiping away sweat, then adjusted his toolbox. Routine, he repeated silently. Just routine. He caught the eye of a young woman, her face ashen, clutching a rosary. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps just desperation, passed between them before she quickly averted her gaze. He moved on. The air conditioning, or what remained of it, was a meager whisper. Heat gathered in the confined space, a suffocating blanket woven from dread and anticipation. Netanyahu could feel the sweat prickling on his back, despite the bulky white jumpsuit. Every detail, every movement was a calculation. Each glance, each breath had to be precise, controlled. He was acutely aware of the ticking clock, a relentless metronome counting down to either triumph or annihilation. They approached the front of the aircraft. He could see Alida, the male hijacker, his face a mask of taut vigilance. His eyes, dark and intense, darted back and forth, surveying every inch of the cabin. His grip on the machine gun was unwavering. Taha, on the other hand, was distracted. He had a look of boredom and was talking on the phone with the negotiator, who was keeping him engaged with technical questions about the aircraft that the hijackers knew nothing about. Netanyahu and his team spread out through the narrow aisle, feigning a thorough inspection of the overhead panels and air vents. The clatter of their tools, the muttered technical jargon, were a thin veil, meant to lull the terrorists into complacency. He knelt, pretending to examine a vent, his senses hyper-alert. The faint hum of the engines, the creaks and groans of the aircraft, the muffled sobs of a child, all were woven into the tapestry of the moment. He could almost taste the fear, a metallic tang on his tongue. He saw the other mechanic move toward the cabin. He knew the plan, the choreography of violence that would soon unfold. They had rehearsed it countless times, each man knowing his precise target, his role in the rapid, deadly ballet that was about to begin. He reached the other hijacker, a woman with fiery red hair. Her gaze met his, her expression a mixture of suspicion and weariness. Her eyes flicked toward his toolbox, then back to his face. He forced a casual smile, hoping to project an aura of harmless competence. She was in front of him. He could feel the tension, a living thing, expanding with the seconds. The air crackled with unspoken threats, with the raw, visceral awareness of life hanging precariously in the balance. The faces of the hostages, a mosaic of fear and suppressed hope, blurred in his peripheral vision. He saw the grip of the man beside him tighten on the toolbox, and he knew it was almost time. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the coming storm. The deception had to hold, just a little longer. The sweat slicked Ehud Barak's palms as he adjusted the tiny radio receiver nestled against his ear. He could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline, a familiar taste that always heralded action, the cusp of violence. Around him, the air in the cramped cockpit, thick with the stale scent of recycled air and fear, seemed to vibrate with a tension so palpable it could snap. The captain, Reginald Levy, remained unnervingly composed, his face a mask of professional detachment, even as Alitara, the male hijacker, stood behind him, a sweat-slicked hand gripping a pistol against his temple. The negotiator, hidden in the shadows of the communication vehicle outside, had been given the green light. The voice in Barak's ear was clipped, almost indifferent. But in that single word, execute, lay the weight of 100 lives, the culmination of weeks of planning, and the chance of a lifetime to reshape the landscape of counterterrorism. The signal had been given. The game was now afoot. In the passenger cabin, Benjamin Netanyahu, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, met the eye of his comrade. Their silent signal exchanged. The pretense was over. The mechanics had become soldiers. He felt the cold press of the gun barrel against his thigh through his white coveralls, and the weight of the silenced pistol he held, ready to draw. Across the plain, the team's operators would be moving. Their movements, honed to razor precision in countless rehearsals, now dictated the moment. Every breath, every heartbeat was a calculated step. They all understood. The moment one gun fired, the others would follow. The success of the operation depended on brutal, simultaneous violence. In the cockpit, Barak took a deep breath, steeling himself. He could see Alitara's face, a mask of grim determination. The man was completely focused on the negotiators and the captain. It was at that moment that the negotiator outside sent a coded phrase and Alitara looked down at his watch, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. The opportunity had arrived. Barak moved. His hand, as quick and precise as a striking cobra, drew the pistol from its holster, the familiar metal a comfort against his skin. Before Alitara could even register the shift in movement, Barak fired. The silenced gunshot, a muted pop barely audible above the hum of the aircraft, was instantly followed by the crash of bone and the sickening thud of the bullet finding its target. Alitara dropped like a puppet with its strings cut, his body collapsing against the captain. The gun clattered to the floor, forgotten. The second hijacker, the one guarding the door, reacted a split second later, turning, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. He had barely time to register the threat when the operators in the cabin had moved. They emerged from the concealment of their positions, drawing their weapons and firing. Shots ripped through the air, their echoes swallowed by the close confines of the plane, a staccato chorus of death. The hijackers, caught completely by surprise, were cut down before they could fully react, their terror etched onto their faces. The cabin exploded in a frenzy of motion and sound. Netanyahu's team moved through the cabin with a balletic precision, neutralizing the remaining hijackers with swift, lethal efficiency. The passengers, frozen in place until the gunfire started, were now thrown into a state of shock and terror, their faces reflecting the carnage around them. For the commandos, though, there was no pause. They kept moving each step of the way until every threat was eliminated. The air crackled, not with electricity, but with a tension so thick it could be tasted. Inside the Boeing 707, the tableau had shifted. The faux mechanics were in place, their white coveralls now alien garments in the dim, stale light. The passengers, a sea of faces etched with fear and the desperate hope of salvation, watched, unmoving. The hijackers, still suspicious, still armed, but subtly off balance after the unexpected appearance of the maintenance crew, were perched on the precipice of a decision, an instant away from action. The commandos, their eyes narrowed, muscles coiled, moved with a controlled, almost predatory stillness. Each man knew his task, his target. In the passenger cabin, Captain Benjamin Netanyahu's team stood poised, their hidden pistols locked and loaded. They'd rehearsed this moment until it was seared into their minds, every angle, every position, every potential obstacle. They were waiting for the signal. The air conditioning unit was a complete distraction. In the cockpit, the tension was amplified. The hijacker, Ali Taha, who as Rima's superior was the most hardened, was preoccupied by a phone call from the negotiator, trying to buy time, attempting to extract the location of the next raid. His focus was diverted, his senses dulled. The lead commando, the one who was the focus of Barak's attention, had his eyes locked on Ali, who was by the door and was about to receive his own orders for the operation. Then, the signal. A single, terse word transmitted over a hidden radio frequency. Execute. The transformation was instantaneous. The seemingly innocuous mechanics became lethal predators. In the passenger cabin, Netanyahu's team unleashed their fury. Pistols emerged from toolboxes. Hands moved with practiced precision, and the first shots rang out, a staccato burst of gunfire that shattered the tense silence. Two of the hijackers fell instantly, bullets piercing their skulls before they could even react. Their weapons clattered to the floor, useless. The screams of passengers cut through the roar of the assault. In the cockpit, the attack was equally brutal and precise. Barak's team swarmed Ali Taha, their weapons trained. Ali, caught off guard by the unexpected aggression, spun toward the threat, his hand already reaching for the trigger. But he was too slow. A volley of shots, delivered at point-blank range, slammed into his chest, felling him. He slumped to the floor, a smoking ruin. The other hijacker, closest to the door, spun around, a look of shocked disbelief on his face as he realized what was happening. A rain of bullets found their mark, and he was no more. 90 seconds. That was the time it took. From the moment the first shot was fired to the final gunshot, the operation unfolded with a speed and efficiency that defied belief. Every movement had been calculated, every shot deliberate. In the midst of the chaos, the commandos began the evacuation. The entire operation, from beginning to end, had been a surgical strike, a whirlwind of calculated violence that left the hijackers dead or disabled, and the hostages, miraculously, unharmed. The plan worked. The deception had proven its worth. But the moment of triumph was already giving way to the aftermath, the beginning of a lifetime. The blood, the terror, the memories, they would linger long after the smoke had cleared. The war was over, but the battle had only just begun. The air inside the Boeing 707 crackled with a tension that had become a tangible thing, thick and suffocating. The stale scent of fear, mingled with the metallic tang of sweat and the cloying perfume of the hijackers, hung heavy in the cabin. Rima Tanis, her face a mask of exhaustion etched with lines of sleeplessness and mounting dread, gripped the handle of her Makarov pistol. The constant pressure, the endless cycle of threats and demands, had worn her down. Hope, a flickering candle in the tempest of her existence, had almost been extinguished. She leaned against the wall, the chill metal a small comfort against her fevered skin. The constant drone of the air conditioning unit, a once familiar sound, now grated on her nerves, a mechanical reminder of the confined space, the endless wait. Her vision flickered and she blinked, trying to clear her head. The negotiator's voice, a steady, measured drone, had faded in the background, another part of the constant cacophony. Ali, pacing near the cockpit door, barked orders, his eyes darting from window to window, ever watchful. A subtle change in the air, a different quality of sound, made her senses sharpen. The click of a toolbox, faint but distinct. The scrape of metal against metal. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across the interior. The mechanics, they called themselves. She had watched them enter, methodical, their movements precise, their faces impassive. They were a team of young men in those pristine white overalls, moving with a familiarity that felt unsettling, like they knew the plane better than she did. They moved toward the cockpit, their voices low, seemingly discussing some mechanical issue. One of them, taller than the others, his face obscured by the brim of his cap, paused near her. Their eyes met. A brief, fleeting connection. She searched his face for a flicker of something, a clue, a hint, but found only a blankness, a carefully constructed neutrality. The mechanics were too close now. Their footsteps echoed against the metal floor, amplified in the sudden silence. They began to fan out, their movements deliberate, almost too rehearsed. The tall one began to fiddle with a panel near the overhead compartments. A tightness gripped her chest, a sudden, searing awareness. The way he held his toolbox, the way he glanced at the other men. It wasn't right. This was not the casual ease of a maintenance crew. It was something else. A knot of dread twisted in her stomach. She realized what they were, what was happening, the second before the world detonated. In the confined space, the air, previously heavy, became an inferno. The tall one with the cap reached into his toolbox, the movement instantaneous, his face losing its neutrality. Her mind screamed a wordless, desperate cry of recognition, but it was swallowed by the roar of gunfire. A searing pain blossomed in her chest. She saw Ali turn, his face contorted in disbelief, the negotiator's words in the background. She grasped for her own pistol, her fingers clumsy and unresponsive. The gun slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor, her vision graying. Rima's last image was of the mechanic's eyes, burning with a cold, ruthless resolve. And then, there was only darkness. The illusion of control she and her comrades had strived so hard to maintain shattered. The sharp crack of gunfire faded, replaced by the ringing in the ears of the survivors. The acrid smell of burnt gunpowder, a metallic tang, filled the cabin, clinging to the inside of the nose. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light piercing the aircraft windows, illuminating the carnage. The air conditioning, once humming a deceptive tune of normalcy, sputtered and died, leaving a suffocating heat. Outside, the midday sun blazed down on the tarmac, a stark contrast to the shadows of fear and confusion that still lingered inside. The screams, the yells, the choked sobs, all slowly died down to a stunned silence. Then came the gasps of relief, the shaky prayers, the whispered thanks, and the first hesitant attempts to assess the damage. Around them, the victims of the raid began to realize what was happening. Some just stared ahead in bewilderment. Others cried, faces streaked with tears and soot. Still others looked at the commandos, expressions shifting from terror to awe. The commandos, their faces grim, moved with practiced efficiency. Their white overalls, once a disguise, were now stained with the residue of violence. The handguns, still smoking, were holstered. They began the process of evacuation, yelling commands to the passengers in a combination of Hebrew, English, and whatever other languages they could muster. "Get up, move, to the emergency exits, quickly." Benjamin Netanyahu, his face set in a mask of stoic determination, oversaw the process. He barked orders, coordinating the movement, ensuring that the injured were attended to first. His eyes, normally sharp and piercing, were now focused, taking in every detail of the aftermath. The sight of Alitara lying motionless in the cockpit, the blood blooming on his crisp white shirt, would be forever etched in his mind. Outside, the ambulances and medical personnel swarmed the plane, a hive of activity. Stretchers were brought forward, blankets were provided. The lucky ones, those with merely bumps or bruises, were led away, wrapped in reassurance into the blinding sunlight. The less fortunate were treated on the spot, their faces reflecting the shock, pain, and above all, the relief of having survived. The initial success of Operation Isotope was undeniable. All 4 hijackers were neutralized. The hostages had been rescued. The world was watching, broadcasting the story of a daring raid and a triumph of human skill. The news would flash across television screens, highlighting the ingenuity and bravery of the Israelis, the precision and discipline of the commandos. Yet, as the smoke cleared and the full horror of the situation became apparent, the true price of success began to weigh on the commandos. For them, there was no celebration, no instant jubilation. Only a deep, numbing exhaustion and the weight of what they had done. They had taken lives, acted as instruments of death, and had witnessed the raw, brutal face of violence. The memory of the event and the face of Rima Tanis would haunt their dreams for many years. Later, the investigation would begin, the debriefings, the psychological evaluations. They would be studied, their actions dissected, the strategy analyzed. But that night, as they sat in the debriefing room, the echoes of gunfire ringing in their ears, they were simply men, burdened by a terrible experience. They had done their duty, saved lives, and served their country. The moral questions that hovered around their action would follow them for the rest of their days. This would be their secret. The white jumpsuits and toolboxes, relics of a deception that saved lives, now reside in glass cases. They're displayed alongside faded photographs and operational reports, sterile reminders of a moment when the impossible was achieved. 40 years after the fact, they still hum with a strange energy, the ghosts of adrenaline and the whisper of calculated risk. They represent a specific point in time when creativity and courage converged to solve an impossible tactical problem, when soldiers became convincing enough actors to fool armed terrorists. when 16 men in maintenance uniforms executed a rescue that validated the principle that hostage situations were not necessarily unsolvable scenarios requiring negotiation and concession. But the question persists. Were these victories, the lives saved, the hijackers neutralized, genuine solutions, or merely tactical wins in a conflict that resisted resolution through military means alone? Operation Isotope, in its immediate aftermath, saved lives. The hostages were safe, but it didn't prevent future hijackings, nor did it address the grievances that fueled Palestinian militancy. It demonstrated what special forces could accomplish, but it also revealed the limits of tactical excellence when confronting strategic and political realities. The media coverage, understandably, focused on the immediate success. The headlines screamed of Israeli heroism, of ingenious tactics and flawless execution. However, the story had a deeper, more complicated texture. For the commandos, the psychological weight was immense. The combat carried out at point-blank range in the cramped confines, surrounded by terrified civilians, took its toll. Several of the operators later admitted to battling anxiety, intrusive memories, the persistent echoes of those 90 seconds of chaos. The decisions that had to be made in fractions of a second had lasting consequences. The strategic lessons, the operational analyses, are meticulously archived. The operation influenced hostage rescue doctrine worldwide, informing special forces units of the value of deception over brute force. Yet, the larger questions, the ethics of preemptive force, the price of retribution, the very nature of terrorism itself, remained unanswered. The white jumpsuits, the toolboxes, the photographs, they are relics of a victory, but also testaments to the complex tapestry of conflict. Consider Rima, a young woman, once so sure of her purpose, now lying dead on the cold floor of a 707. She died believing in the power of her cause. As the last hostages descended the emergency slides, the aircraft finally stilled, the only sounds the movements of the commandos carrying out the final checks. The shooting had ceased, but the questions raised: how nations confront terrorism, what risks are acceptable in hostage situations, and whether military solutions resolve political problems, would persist long after the last mechanic removed his white jumpsuit, revealing the combat uniform beneath. One shot had been fired, and the last mechanic removed his white jumpsuit, revealing the combat uniform beneath. The operation had transitioned from execution to consequence. The story was still unfolding. The echoes of that day in May, the screams of the hostages, the sharp crack of gunfire, those were etched into the very fabric of the Sabena Flight 571, and in the hearts and minds of the men and women who were there, they would last forever.